Hi, my name is Mac Pade, and today I'll be presenting on disaster preparedness for children in reference to house fires. So, children are a particularly vulnerable population. They have difficulty seeking safety, escaping dangerous situations, or making decisions at critical moments. And that's because their brain is not fully developed yet, specifically the frontal lobe. Their cognition is not fully developed. So, in these high stress situations, such as a house fire, they're not fully able to make quick on their feet decisions to help them escape from a dangerous situation, which is why they're more vulnerable to it. They're also more susceptible to health consequences and are overrepresented as victims. So this is because their bodies are still developing, they're still growing, and that means they are impacted much more by the physical dangers of a disaster situation. They actually have an inherent dependency. So kids have an inherent dependency regardless outside of a disaster situation. But within a disaster, they are almost entirely, if not entirely, dependent on the adult, the caregiver, the guardian, to help them think through what to do, to guide them out of a dangerous situation, or to get them to safety. So being separated from their caregiver can really complicate the recovery process. On the one hand, it's already incredibly difficult for young children to communicate all of their needs at all times. So if they're interacting with a first responder or a member of medical staff or a police officer, a firefighter, then young children, toddlers some of them may not be able to speak, but the ones who can speak may not be able to verbalize, like, this is my name, this is my parents' name, this is where I live, this is what I need help with. So it's important that their caregivers, their guardians are there to help them communicate that. Additionally, it really can be distressing emotionally to be separated from their parent or guardian. Just in general, little kids can be particularly clingy, but during a disaster situation, a high stress situation such as a house fire, it's going to intensify that. And so it can make the emotional recovery even more difficult if they're separated from their parents. Additionally, relocation or being relocated from the original home to another place of residency, that can cause significant emotional distress. And so one way we'll talk about a bit more to kind of help with that is thriving on routines and normalcy. Because kids thrive on routine and normalcy in all situations. So we'll talk about that a bit more later. And no child is too young to have mental health effects after a disaster. Kids, even little kids, can display symptoms of depression, anxiety, grief, and display behavioral problems. And actually, the emotional disturbance in children post-disaster is higher than the general population. They just internalize things more deeply. They're not as able to cope with things as adults are. Kids have different reactions to disaster situations based on their age group, but any of these can be found in any age group, but this is just some generalizations. So kids 0 to 6 years old may have increased irritability, they may have excessive crying, or just be overly attached to their caregivers. And that comes from a reaction of anxiety. After a stressful event, such as a house fire, they may absolutely cling to their caregiver to try to feel safe there. They may be frightened, particularly of being separated from their parent or guardian after an event such as a house fire, just because that house, the home, is a place of safety and security for most of us, especially for children. And so if anything damages that, or if that place is taken away by a house fire, they may really cling to their caregiver for that sense of security. So kids 7 to 10 years old, they may become hyper-fixated on the disaster. And this is because they're a bit older, they have higher cognitive abilities, and so they may try to understand as much about it as possible. They try to contextualize it within their world of knowledge. They may watch news coverage about it, or talk to their friends about it, or read about it on the internet. And this is where parents come in, and they may need to provide some clarifying information, because the kids may see things that aren't necessarily true or misrepresent the truth. Additionally, and again, we'll cover this a bit more later, but parents can shield their kids from prolonged emotional distress or damage by shielding them from excessive media coverage of the disaster of the event. And kids this age group, they may be old enough to understand that these things happen, and because it has happened, it can happen again. So they may really fear repeated incidents. This is where parents can come in and try to provide some safety and reassurance. And then older kids, 11 to 18, all kids are going to look to their parents for how they're acting and how to model themselves after it. But kids, especially in this older age group, are going to model their behavior after their parents. Some kids in this age group, because they feel a loss of control, they may try to regain it by engaging in dangerous activities. And some of the examples that I saw were reckless driving or underage drinking or participating in drug usage. And any of these kind of dangerous activities are just to try to regain some of the control they feel has been lost by this disaster. On the other hand, some kids in this age group may socially isolate. The fear and the anxiety may be overwhelming to them, and they hunker down and try to feel as safe as possible, even if that means isolating themselves from the world. So very briefly, I just want to discuss what the definition of preparedness is according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And they define preparedness as actions taken to plan, organize, equip, train, and exercise to build and sustain the capabilities necessary to prevent, protect against, mitigate the effects of, respond to, and recover from those threats that pose the greatest risk. That's a lot, but we'll break that down bit by bit at how it relates to specifically house fires. And preparedness in society in general for disasters is in lots of different areas, all the way at the top of the federal government agency, down to local government, and then for the private sector and non-government organizations in the broader community, and then preparedness for individual households. And since we're discussing house fires, a lot of that preparedness is about individual households, and so that's the realm we're going to focus on for this presentation. So house fire preparedness, for prevention, we'll talk about the 5 leading causes of house fires in the U.S., which according to the National Fire Protection Association are cooking, heating, electrical, smoking, and candles. We'll talk about some basic protection efforts, home sprinkler systems, smoke alarms, and fire extinguishers. The main mitigation effort that we're going to focus on is having an escape plan and what that escape plan looks like. The response, mainly calling for help, and then recovery, the physical and emotional damage control that might need to be done. So as far as prevention efforts go, and kids can be brought along and taught about prevention efforts. A lot of this stuff is stuff that adults need to be aware of and ensuring is happening to prevent house fires, but just by making kids aware that these are some things you can do to prevent a fire from breaking out, they can be little fire stoppers. They can help be on alert and actually be aware of things that may cause a fire unintentionally. So for example, a kid may drop a tablecloth too close to the stovetop that catches fire just because they weren't aware that that is a flammable object and it's too close to the stovetop. So just informing kids about these prevention efforts can really help in preventing fires. So for cooking, stay in the kitchen, don't cook while sleepy or intoxicated, keep flammable objects away from the stovetop. For grease and oven fires, grease fires can't be put out with water, and so they need to be smothered. So the NFPA recommends having like a pot or a pan lid nearby to try to smother it. And then oven fires, it's recommended that if a fire breaks out in the oven, keep that oven door closed, turn the heat off, and call for help. For heating, keep flammable objects at least 3 feet away from a fire heater. Turn off the heater when you're leaving a room. Put out the fire if you're walking away. Use a screen protector to keep any sparks or ashes from flying out of the fireplace and catching fire on something in the surrounding area. And let those ashes from a put-out fire entirely cool before their disposal. That way they don't reignite or catch fire in the trash can. For electrical, call a qualified electrician for any work that you have done. I know we all try to save money, but it's not worth it if it catches fire. Only plug in 1 heat-producing appliance per outlet. That way it doesn't get overloaded. It doesn't overload the circuit. Don't run electrical cords underneath carpets or across doorways. They can be stepped on and the cords can get damaged, which could spark and cause an electrical fire. And it's important to install AFCIs and GFCIs, and these are arc fault circuit interrupters and ground fault circuit interrupters. And what these devices do is prevent the risk of shock when you're handling electrical equipment and prevent an electrical fire from sparking up just from overheating. Candles, don't leave candles unattended. Keep them at least 1 foot away from any flammable objects. Never leave candles unattended with children. A child attending a candle is an unattended candle. Place candles on sturdy surfaces if they're burning, and when they're burning, don't burn all the way down. It's recommended by the NFPA that once the wick gets about this long, or that short, really, go ahead and put it out. Don't burn it all the way down. And then, believe it or not, some people do still smoke indoors, which is one of the top 5 leading causes of a house fire. So according to the statistics from the NFPA, actually 15% of house fires as a result of smoking are started in the bedroom. So I thought that this breakdown of the different areas of the home where house fires from smoking erupt, I thought that was pretty interesting, so I included it here. And again, some basic prevention tips. These are not as necessary to explain to children, because hopefully we're not explaining to children smoking unless we're explaining the dangers of smoking, but I went ahead and included it just for some general safety knowledge. So if you're smoking, use a deep ashtray. Don't discard the butts on flammable objects such as vegetation, and make sure the butts are all the way put out before discarding them in the trash or outside. You can even dampen it with a bit of water, just to make sure it's all the way extinguished and it doesn't reignite on hitting some dry leaves or paper in the trash can. But again, not as relevant to children, but I went ahead and included it just for general knowledge. So for protection, these are some systems of protection for the house that you can explain to kids, and this may help them feel a bit of relief of anxiety once they start learning about fires. Just learning about a fire in the home and learning about fire preparedness, some kids may respond anxiously to that, and so explaining to them how you're protecting the home may ease some of that anxiety. So a home sprinkler system is the most blanket effective protection method, and that's just because if a fire breaks out, the sprinklers are triggered and the water can immediately begin to put out the fire in real time as it's happening. A smoke alarm is going to be particularly important for kids to be involved in understanding, because if that alarm goes off, kids need to know what it sounds like so they know how to respond. It's important to do an escape plan with kids, which we'll talk about on the next slide, but if they don't know what the smoke alarm sounds like, they can't know that they need to actually enact that escape plan. So show your kids where the smoke alarms are, have them help you test them once a month, and have them help replace the batteries once a year. And just the Red Cross recommends having at least 1 smoke alarm on each floor of the house. Red Cross also explains the pass method, and this is going to be more important information for older kids and older adults. Younger kids may not be able to physically hold a fire extinguisher. It may be too big or too heavy for them. But for older kids, even as young as 10 or 11, they may be able to actually hold a fire extinguisher, so it may be beneficial to teach them how to use it. So they explain the pass method, which stands for pull the pin, aim low, squeeze the handle slowly, and sweep from side to side. And so if there's an emergency situation, it's a lot easier to remember that one word, pass, and then go through what each word means and how to actually use the fire extinguisher. So for mitigation efforts, mostly it's going to be an escape plan. And this is one area where kids may really enjoy fire prevention and safety planning. Together you can draw a map of the house and highlight an escape route out. You can teach kids about locating 2 ways out of every room. So for example, the room I'm in now, I have a window and I have a door. And so that means in an emergency situation, I have 2 ways out of this room. So you can actually go around as a game throughout the house with your kids and have them pick out the 2 ways out, at least, of every single room. The whole family can decide on an outside meeting spot in the case that you all get separated while you're escaping from the home, and this is going to help with the relocation efforts. Reunification efforts after a fire. And finally, have the kids practice this escape route on their own. Unfortunately, circumstances may not allow you as the parent or caregiver to help the kids escape from the home. And so having them practice that route on their own may get them comfortable and prepared in the case of an emergency to escape on their own without the help from their parents. The NFPA also recommends get out and stay out. And that means once they're out, stay out of the house. And so that's something you need to have your kids kind of understand. Even if they get out and mom and dad are still back inside, if they get out and brother or sister are still inside, or the puppy is still inside, once they're out, they need to stay out. And then finally, kids may not understand logically the way that adults understand, but smoke rises. And so it's important to kind of teach them that because smoke rises, they need to crawl under the smoke if it's necessary when they're escaping. And this is going to help prevent smoke inhalation, which causes lung damage. So finally, we'll go over response and recovery, and these are pretty intertwined because they happen in pretty quick succession. So the immediate response in the case of a fire, the alarm goes off and you're responding by enacting this escape plan. Again, the Red Cross also says to get out and stay out. So have your kids really understand that concept. I know it may be stressful for them to be out of the house without their parents, but once they're out, they need to stay out of the house for their own safety. Finally, call 911. That way first responders, firefighters, medical staff can get there and start to help. Teach your kids the stop, drop, and roll. I think it's enough. Excuse me. One of the kids I nanny for came and asked me a quick question. So I think it's enough common knowledge in our society now, just the phrase stop, drop, and roll, but go over that phrase with your kids. That way they understand what stop, drop, and roll actually means. Stopping if they have realized that their clothes, their hair, some part on them has caught fire, dropping to the ground, and rolling to put it out. Once you kind of explain that, it makes sense what the phrase means, so they can actually use it if necessary. So the immediate recovery is to seek medical attention. Again, because kids are still growing and developing, and because they face greater health consequences as a result of disasters, especially a fire where there's so much immediate physical harm possible in the situation, it's important to immediately contact your healthcare professional, to go to the hospital, see what medical attention needs to be done. They may have inhaled some smoke and have lung damage. They may have been burned. They may have been cut. And so it's important to seek that medical attention pretty immediately for kids. As part of the emotional recovery process, you and your family can contact loved ones, family, friends, extended family, and just let them know what happened and that you're okay, or what you may need some help with. And just that process of reaching out to loved ones and asking for help may be emotionally healing in a way for you and your family. And then finally, the lasting recovery process is the emotional recovery. And so for kids, it's going to look like needing an open space to talk about what they're feeling, whether it's sadness that there's been some damage to their home, it's anxiety about a future fire, it's anger that this fire broke out and they lost some of their stuff. It's grief if they've lost a family member or a pet, or even grief for the life that they knew before pre-fire, if it's, kind of lasting impacts. Whatever it is, even if it's these bits of panic that come and go very quickly and they're fine in between, whatever that is, having an open conversation about it and providing them the space to talk about it openly without judgment can be very emotionally healing and actually allow them to build some resilience. So just to kind of recap, you can help children before, during, and after a fire. So before, arm them with as much knowledge about fire safety as possible. That way you can prevent a fire, involve them in the safety and escape planning process. That way they know what to do in the case of a fire, and have them practice that escape route independently, just in case that you aren't able to assist them in the escape process. It's really important as the adult in the situation to role model appropriate behavior. So one thing that parents do in general is to role model appropriate behavior to their kids because you're teaching them about the world. But in a stressful situation such as this, your kids are going to be looking to you for how to respond to the disaster. And if you're freaking out, they're going to really freak out because you're the person they're looking to for safety and security. So it's important to kind of, even if you are freaking out, to breathe in, calm down, and respond appropriately. Be focused on escaping and safety, and do it with a calm and level head as much as possible, because it's going to help your kids to remain calm and level-headed and be able to escape and get to a safe place. And that safety is going to allow you to freak out later. So during a house fire, if it breaks out, help your kids escape. They're small bodies. They may not be able, they may just be too weak to move things out of the way if there's structural damage. They may have trouble crawling over things or under things. So if it's at all possible, you're there. If you're not separated, help them escape from the home. Again, they don't have the cognitive thinking abilities that we have as adults, and so they may not be able to think quickly on their feet about escaping, which is why pre-planning that escape route is so important. But they may freeze up out of fear, and so just helping them to get out of the house is vitally important. And then after, try to maintain the routines that they know. So again, if you read with them before bed at night, if you get them up and eat breakfast with them before school in the morning, if you take them to school, whatever your natural routines are, even if you are relocated from the home after a house fire, if there's too much damage to stay there, trying to maintain those routines is going to help create a sense of normalcy, and that's going to provide some comfort where they can begin to do some healing. Shield them from excessive media coverage. Again, it can add and prolong the grieving process. Kids don't always, especially younger kids, aren't always able to discern what they're seeing happening in real time versus in past times. And so seeing it played out over and over again has the potential to bring up all those feelings again and prolong the emotional disturbance rather than being able to heal through it. And then finally, just continuing to have those open conversations, having non-judgmental conversations, sharing that you also are feeling emotional after the event and validating what they're going through. That's going to build a resilience that they'll carry with them into the next event in their life that is stressful or traumatic potentially. So one resource that I found that was particularly interesting about fire safety for children was the Sparky Schoolhouse. And this is a website, information outlet that the NFPA sponsors. And so I really like them because they have age-appropriate information all about fire safety for kids. They have videos, PowerPoints, informational PDFs, and even teacher lessons. And a lot of this information is even broken down by age or grade level. So if you have a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old, this website has information on all three of those age groups about how to talk to them about fire safety or how to do some prevention efforts with them or how to escape plan. They have music videos and games to play, and they even have like mobile games that you can download for your kids to teach them about fire safety. So there's Sparky's Funhouse, which is an escape planning game. They have Sparky's Firehouse, which is about fire safety, and The Case of Missing Smoke Alarms. So I thought that was just really cute that they even have mobile games to help, little ones who are playing more of these visual games, internalize some of the knowledge. And what a creative tool to help them learn. So from these resources, I have 2 examples here. The first up here, I guess it would be up here, is a slide from their Let's Learn About Fire Safety with Sparky the Dog PowerPoint. And it is detailing how to call 911. And I thought that was really interesting that they detail how to call for help, because it's so naturally understood to adults, call for help, call 911, that we forget that little ones may not even know how to call for help, may not even know how to call 911. So this slide, again, is ridiculously age-appropriate information, ridiculously beneficial knowledge for these young children to have. The slide shows them where the buttons are, then where the 9 is and where the 1 is, and how to press the dial button, and then goes into detailing what to say when the dispatch responder answers the phone. Tells the kids to describe the emergency, tell them your name, tell them your phone number, and tell them your home address. And that's really important information. And I didn't consider that children very, very young may not even have this information within themselves when I say call for help. So it's just a really good example of age-appropriate information. And the second resource I have here is a choice board of activities about fire safety. So there is like a read a book activity, and it's a book called How Much Do You Know About Fire Safety? There's some games, find all the smoke alarms in your home, hot or not, where you try to locate all the hot objects in the house that could potentially cause a fire. Watch the I Spy fire safety video. I just thought this was a fun activity that you could play with your kids to teach them about fire safety. These are some of my sources, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming to today's presentation. I hope you learned something new, and I hope all of this is helpful information when talking to your kids or any kids in your life about fire safety.